Hi everyone, today I wanted to talk about something that I was going to do a video live, but I'm kind of glad I didn't do that in the end. So this is about me replacing the steering wheel on the 350Z for something a little bit more track focused and comfortable. I've seen a few videos online. If you've ever done this before or you're looking into doing something like this, I'm sure you've done your YouTube searches. I found a lot of the videos weren't particularly clear, so whether the camera was bad because somebody had their phone in their hand while trying to do a job as well at the same time, or they skipped a few steps, or they didn't particularly have the right equipment, or the same equipment that I was going to be using, or they skipped over a step quite quickly and just told you to do something, but when it came to it you weren't sure how to do it. Anything like this. This is why I wanted to do this video. So that's the reason that we're in the studio and we're not by the car. The job has been done, so I wanted to just pick up some key points that I feel really need a bit more focus and attention and talking through so that it's a bit clearer. Because some of the steps are quite straightforward, some of them aren't. Others may have really good points around hindsight in terms of what to do, or a particular tool to use, or a particular position to be in when making an adjustment or changing a part. So first of all, the step I've read is that you need to disconnect the battery. Some say to only disconnect the negative, some say to do both. I did both. Initially there's a kidney shaped almost mount, and we'll nip to the car in a moment, that you have to remove so you can actually get access to the battery. The negative, which you should always remove first with a 10mm socket, is very accessible and that takes a few minutes. Loosen the nut, slide it off and just hook it around to the back of some plastic, whatever's nearest, to make sure that it's not going to swing back and touch a terminal. The positive was a little harder for two reasons. One, it has a plastic casing on there and the actual attachment to the terminal looked a bit more complex, and once I'd loosened it a similar amount to that I had done of the negative, I wasn't getting any movement. So I had to take a step back, look back online, see how other people had done this. All it actually needed to be done is that the nut, the 10mm nut around the terminal, just keep loosening that a little bit more than you had to do on the negative and it will come off. There is a trim piece around this as well that needed to come off because I couldn't fit the socket in. Now there's some, I assume they're Nissan proprietary plugs around there, and I gave them a bit of attention and a bit of stick to try and get them moving, and they didn't move. And again, I had to go and look online as to how these things fit. So the middle bit needs to be prized off with a screwdriver. So something nice flathead screwdriver, something similar to this. Pop the middle bit out, that relieves the pressure from the main piece and the fins that stick underneath, and then the actual whole piece can come off. And again, when you're replacing this part, you do that in reverse. So middle bit sticking out, put the base in, then put the top in. That makes the fins flush underneath, and you've got the purchase that you need so that they don't move. So step one is down. We've disconnected the battery and all you needed was a 10mm socket. Step two is the removal of the factory wheel, and this is where I'm going to spend most of my time today, because again you may have different wheels, different hubs, different wiring or anything else, and we'll get to that in a minute. So beauty is we have the wheel here, which is going to be a lot easier for us to walk through than trying to do so in situ. First of all, as you may have read, there are two security bolts that need to be removed. One on this side and the same on the other, and they're, as you can see, covered already by a piece of plastic casing, just so it looks neat and tidy. Now I'll try and maybe put a picture in, but there is a very small gap around this circular piece. That allows you to get in with a very small flathead screwdriver, get underneath and pop it out. I'm trying to be gentle. There you go. Wow, that came off quick. And there we have it. So that's just a cover. Now you will have a screw, and again the same on the other side, which is the Torx 30 security head that you need. And that is not a standard Torx, that is a Torx with a hole in the middle. Now, as you can also hopefully see, there is a lot of thread lock on there. You can see that that's blue. I'll put a high-res picture up in a moment. This thread lock makes this bolt extremely difficult to get out. And when the car's in situ, and the driver's side, it's not too bad. And this is another big learning for me, because you've got the door open, put a cushion down, kneel against the side of the car, and you can get to this. Now what I did, I used a security bit from this and I put it straight onto the end of a screwdriver. So I did this manually. No power tools, I didn't plug it into a screwdriver or an impact driver. My worry is that with so many moving parts and outside of the hole it's such a thin wall for the piece itself that if I drove too much torque through the bolt that it would snap. I don't know what these are made out of. But again, I'd heard that they were very difficult and now I've got this off, you can see why. There's so much thread lock keeping this in place. So while I managed to get the driver's side off because I had access from the door and I could go in maintaining inwards pressure while turning, I wasn't so lucky on the passenger side. Now, our cabins in the 350Z are not very wide, they're not very big. I was hunched up on the passenger seat with my head almost touching the rearview mirror, trying to get an angle. Now, my first thought was, well, why can't I just turn the wheel and then I'll do it on the other side and everything's good? Well, we've taken the battery out, so we can start the car, we can't, okay, the wheel won't turn because the power steering is not going to kick in. So perhaps this is something in hindsight that we could have done once, replaced the battery, turned the wheel, taken the battery off and done it again, so that both times we're accessing this bolt from the driver's side and that we don't have to make it difficult for ourselves, because ultimately I obviously did not have the right angle and I threaded the screw, and then that began a lot of contemplation, thinking and research. Called to my dad as well to try and work out what we can do. We had a few options. One was hammering on a socket head to try and get enough purchase, but knowing how difficult this was to get off, that's not going to work. Long story short, in the end I drilled it out. Because I'm taking this off and for the foreseeable future will not need to replace the factory wheel, I screwed the bolt out. Slowly from a 4, 5 to 6 mil bit. Once that had come off, everything came apart. Now, again, as you may have seen on YouTube, once the 2 bolts have been removed, this is when you can very, very gently remove the centerpiece. And this is the airbag. So we'll set this down for a moment. This will obviously remain on your wheel. I'll take some high-res pictures again, but you can see where I've drilled this through and it has gone through the back of the bolt. The bolt, also absolutely caked in thread lock, is welded to these 2 plates. So my job now is to unweld this, find the right bolt, and I'm actually going to replace it with a standard hex. I think this is an M6 bolt, and that will go in. Just like that. And it will be covered up, which means, again, if we need to replace this at any point in the future, we don't have the same issues. Always be careful with this. This is the primary reason why we take the battery off before we do anything, but these things can still go off. Now, on the videos that I saw, there are yellow and most of the time orange clasps and connections at the back. As you can probably see here, I only have the yellow. So again, you use a flathead screwdriver and you take off the black, you lift, there's an arrow on the actual piece. I don't think I have that because it's still within the car, but there's an arrow down from the side that you should leverage the black clasp with a flathead screwdriver. Again, being very gentle, that comes off and the piece is loose, this comes out, no problem. Everything else from there wasn't too bad. We had some wiring challenges, but this is what the wheel looks like without, and you'll have a 19mm bolt here. I simply used a deep socket on the end of a torque wrench. You can use a breaker bar or whatever you want, and this gave me enough clearance from here down to the middle to take it off. Now, one lesson that everyone mentions on the YouTube videos, and I'm going to do the same, once you've loosened the bolt and you can finger roll it from the thread, do not take it off. Leave it on a couple of turns. That's when you need to start to wiggle the wheel, and obviously if the bolt isn't there and you wiggle it with enough force, it could come and hit you in the face. So this way we get it free from the car, but it's not going to come and hit you. We then take it off manually with our fingers and then the wheel comes off. Now, as you can see, we have this, I think it's called a coil spring grey connector with an earth in yellow going to this side clip here. Now, in my hub that I purchased, to use to mount my aftermarket wheel, I use the Works Bell hub, imported from Japan via Nemgun and their website. It's an official part for the Nissan 350Z from Japan. They had a replacement piece, so that is where the connection was made back into the car that would ultimately connect up to my horn. So the splines that are on the back of the hub, just as they are on here, we also have a point, an indentation to use to mark where the straight is. Now the one thing that I found very useful when doing this is before we took the bolt of the wheel off, the 19mm bolt, we turned it to the right, keys off and locked it. This means that we don't have any movement, but again, it's critical to notice where that middle point is, and on mine it was around 1-2 o'clock on the dial. So that's how the hub went on with the splines. I pulled the cables through. Again, there were two. There was this, which is for the horn, which again came with the hub. This plugged in, the other one on the hub into the car, pull the other end of this black cable through, and then the other piece was on the end of this, the other end of this. So the yellow connector that came off runs through the center console, through the drive shaft if you will, and we have the resistors that we plug into the end, which creates a closed circuit so that we don't have an airbag light once installation is complete. Once we have the hub on and the cables are pushed through, the next problem I had was wiring up the horn correctly. The cables that I had with the Works Bell hub was a red positive and a black negative, and I couldn't see a ground. Now, I tried various combinations initially, nothing worked, so I was pressing the horn, making sure the ignition was on. Of course, I'd reconnected my battery at this point, and nothing worked. I then started to try some other combinations, and at one point the horn would work constantly without me pressing the button, which of course isn't good and no fun for the neighbours. I did read reports of people shorting out their horns, so that was something that I wanted to try avoid. However, in the end I realised two things. One, only the negative was required. Don't quite know why, I'm no electrics expert. If you know, answer in the comments. And that was the black. So the black went onto the corresponding, per the guidelines given to me with the OMP wheel that I bought, which came with the horn. That told me which of the two prongs on the back was negative and which one was positive. Neutral, or the ground should I say, that came with the horn was actually built within the back and was a metal wire that stuck out, and it was spring loaded. What I worked out from another video is that the wall, the metal wall of the hub within which the horn sits, acts as the ground. So negative on, when it touched, hit the horn, it worked. So then we knew it was good. The only other challenge that I had was the shoulders, the plastic shoulders on the inside of the horn that are used to create resistance when put into the steering wheel. They're made for the width of the OMP steering wheel. Now, when everything was put together, the Works Bell hub, the outside actually sat within, if you will, the hole of the wheel, which narrowed the circumference and meant that the horn would not perfectly sit within. I grabbed a Stanley knife and I went to town on the shoulders, filing them down until they were small enough and narrow enough that they would fit into the hole without any problems, but still wide enough to give me the pressure along all those 6 points that I needed to make sure that it wouldn't fall out. And everything worked fine. So I guess to summarise, battery off, we've talked about the clasps to take the trim around so that you've got access to the positive terminal that you need to take off with a 10mm socket set. Secondly, and probably most importantly, these goddamn screws. So my advice, if I was to do this again tomorrow, I would turn the wheel around, lock it, take the battery off, take the clasp off to provide access to the bolt, and I would do the passenger side first. Would I use a different tool? I think having the control with a manual screwdriver was good enough. I think if I did something else, I would probably have used a socket set and an adapter, of course, to go from the, I think it's 3/8 heads down to a screwdriver set to then put the security Torx 30 bolt into. The challenge you have there is you have to ensure that you're going in straight, and if you start to turn an angle in any dimension and any plane, that's going to cause you a problem. And that was the primary reason that I used a screwdriver, because I knew that I could go in straight and keep that straight using both hands as I turned left. I would then reconnect the battery, turn on the car, spin the wheel back to normal 12 o'clock, battery off, and I would do the driver's side. Everything after that, apart from the horn, but that lesson learnt, and some horns may work differently, but I learnt this again from doing some research, and hopefully if your horn is built something similar on your aftermarket wheel, then again, black on the negative, the ground is built within the back of the wheel and will ground to the inside of the hub. Any questions, let me know. Be safe, and I hope it works.